The Supreme Court, with conservative Chief Justice John Roberts leading the way, declared the federal health care law is indeed constitutional. Healthcare advocates were ecstatic, along with the president and Democrats. Republicans tried to quickly move the issue into the political arena. Now that the initial shockwaves are over, what does Ohio do next? We welcome back to Capitol Square Attorney General Mike DeWine. General, good to see you.
Jim, good to see you. Thank you.
All right, so John Roberts said in that opinion last week, the federal government does not have the power to order people to buy health insurance. The federal government does have the power to impose a tax on those without health insurance. Surprised by that ruling?
Surprised, yes. Certainly surprised by the fact that he came down and found that this was a tax when, if you look back, President Obama said it wasn't a tax. His proponents in Congress said it wasn't a tax. The lower courts who looked at it, most of them thought it was not a tax. But 5 justices of the Supreme Court say it's a tax, and it's a tax.
You campaigned on the issue, said that you would have Ohio join the lawsuit against the Affordable Care Act, which you did after your election, Ohio being one of 26 states, I believe, in that lawsuit. The irony here is that you prevailed. Your contention that the Commerce Clause could not fund this, actually the court agreed with. It was just the tax issue that kind of came from nowhere. But so, I mean, how do you feel about this? Was it money well spent for the state of Ohio to engage this discussion and to take on this law?
Well, it certainly was money well spent. Ohio now has the option, as all states do now because of this decision, to accept the new expansion of Medicaid or to reject that. The court agreed with us and said what the federal government was doing when it said, look, if you don't take this new Medicaid and pay for it, the federal government pays for part of it, but we pay for a lot of it as well, we're going to not only deny that to you, but we're going to take away all the Medicaid. And the court said, look, that's just going too far. So now the governor, the state legislature, Ohio leaders have the option of what to do in this regard, to spend the money for schools, to spend the money for mental health, or to spend the money for Medicaid expansion. So we won that. We also won, as you pointed out at the beginning of the show, we also won in regard to the whole issue of the Commerce Clause. And people who are watching may say, well, what difference does it make how the court decided? Well, I would submit that if the court had come down a 5-4 decision and said, this is just fine under the Commerce Clause, Congress has the power to do that, that would have been a great expansion of the Commerce Clause. It would have been the earth would have shook, really, in regard to the relationship between the federal government and the states and the federal government and private citizens. They didn't do that. And so what the court didn't do is much more significant even than what they did.
What signal does it give Congress on the tax issue, though?
I think people are going to continue to read that and try to figure it out. As we talked about the other day, you and I talked, when you label something a tax, it's much more difficult as a practical matter to get it through, I think, than it is if you say, oh, it's just under our power under the Interstate Commerce Clause. So from a practical matter, I think it's still hard for Congress ever to pass a tax. The legal implications of that, though, we're still trying, frankly, to sort out.
Let's put up this statement from Mitt Romney. This is back in 2006 when he was governor, because you mentioned in your press conference immediately after this that, well, first, let's go to Stuart Butler, and we'll read both of these, from the Heritage Foundation. Under this arrangement, all households, this is the Heritage Foundation, conservative organization, recommending the individual mandate. Under this arrangement, all households would be required to protect themselves from major medical costs by purchasing health insurance or enrolling in a prepaid health plan. The degree of financial protection can be debated, but the principle of mandatory family protection is central to a universal health care system in America. Republicans, conservatives, very, very concerned about the rising costs of emergency room visits at that time. Let me just have you respond philosophically to that. I mean, this idea of a mandate that we all pay in was conservative generated. I mean, this has not always been a progressive liberal idea.
No, I think that's true. There are a lot of different people, liberals and conservatives, that suggested that this might be an idea. It's clear that the American people don't like it. If you look at Obamacare, they like a lot of things. They like the fact that if you have a child who is still at home at 23, 24, you can include them in your insurance policy. They like the fact that if you have a pre-existing illness, your spouse has a cancer and can't get insurance under Obamacare, She can get insurance. So people
But it's gotta be paid for.
like those things, but they don't like the individual mandate. And I think the biggest mistake, and I said
And
this.
if you were a 20 or 30 something, you would really not like, right? I mean,
Well, that's right.
really.
You wouldn't like it, and it takes away your choice. And basically, what it does is, in essence, it makes a 25-year-old who's out working pay for somebody else's insurance. Now, that's a public policy debate that we're going to continue to have. I think the biggest mistake that President Obama made, even though he's had this now declared to be constitutional, I still think it was a mistake to try to pass this bill in a partisan way. He passed it. If you go back and look at the big bills that have passed in this country's history that really changed things, civil rights, for example, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security under FDR, they all had some bipartisan support. It may have been pushed by one party or one president, but there was some bipartisan support. This one didn't have any bipartisan support at all, and I think that was just a mistake. There was a deal to be made. He didn't make the deal.
Let me put it, this is Governor Romney. As this moves to the political arena, obviously Republicans now talking about this national health care tax. This is Romney just a few years ago, 2006, as governor. With regards to the individual mandate, the individual responsibility program that I propose that is essential for bringing the health care costs down for everyone and getting everyone the health insurance they need. So, I mean, just a few years ago in Massachusetts, Romney's recommending basically the same thing we now see extrapolated at the federal level.
There's a fundamental difference. I think the fundamental difference is, I don't, I'm not going to speak for the governor. He certainly can speak for himself, but there's a fundamental difference legally and from a constitutional point of view, in my opinion. The states can do a lot of different things. They're the states. And if one state wants to come up with a plan like Massachusetts, they have every constitutional right to do that. It may be good policy, maybe bad policy. They have the right to do that.
But Romney was saying at the time that he thought that it could extrapolate to a good national program.
He thought it was good for the state. It's clear, in my opinion, that it's not constitutional for it to be done at the federal level. Now, the court has found a way, Justice Roberts has found a way to hold it to be constitutional, not on the Commerce Clause, which is where the battle was really fought out, but under the idea it's a tax. And as he very eloquently pointed out, disagree with him, but as he eloquently pointed out, and to paraphrase him, it's not our business to judge the merits of this. And I think also that you see a justice who, very correctly in this sense, is reluctant to overturn Congress on a bill that's passed. I disagree with his end result, though.
I loved your reaction to John Roberts. I mean, if you were a fly on the wall in the White House and it turned out to be John Roberts, and if you were George W. Bush down in Texas, I mean, these things happen. Right? They have happened before, but I mean, John Roberts was the deciding vote.
He was the deciding vote, and it just shows you never know, and you never know what's going to happen.
As the state's legal counsel, what do you recommend now to the governor and lieutenant governor as far as this exchange goes? Do you have any input on that? Any recommendations on that?
I do not have any.
Do you have a preference on whether the state of Ohio should be running such a thing, or just leave it to the federal government?
No. I think that's entirely up to the policymakers. My job is to be their lawyer and advise on legal issues, and that's what the Attorney General does, and that's why we took this suit into federal court and why I joined the other states. But as far as policy, no, I'll leave that up to the governor.
Last question. You know, what was admirable about covering you when you were in the Senate is that you were one of those Republicans who would sit at a round table with Democrats and hash out big issues. It hurt you back home, Rhino, Republican in name only, that dreaded term that conservative Republicans paint. But when you look back to Washington, D.C. now, and you talk about health care, is there any mood for any roundtable discussion, any behind closed door discussion, or are we past that point now where a Republican can't afford to cut a deal and vice versa?
Here's what I hope happens. I hope Governor Romney wins, and I hope at that point we try to put together as Republicans a replacement for Obamacare, but we don't make the mistake that the Democrats made. We try to fashion something that the vast majority of the American people can accept, and that we reach out to both sides of the aisle to put something on the table that the American people will say, hey, that's a good thing.
Very good. General, always good to see you.
Good to
Thanks
see
so
you.
much for coming in.
Jim.